everyone. My name is Shama. I am the program director here at Girls and Geese. We are here for our very first edition of Champions in Life, a series that features not only champions on the mats, but those that are champions in life. For today, we have our very first guest, Dominyka Obelenyte. She's going to be chatting with us a little bit, and you guys get to be a fly on the wall for this awesome conversation. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited. I can't wait to get into the topics we have.
Okay. So you and I have been friends for a long time, and I always loved one of my favorite things, my favorite attractions when I went to New York was to stop in and train with you. And my favorite parts of that was not only the outstanding jujitsu that I learned from you, but the conversations that you and I had on the streets of New York afterwards on our walks to the subway. And so I wanted you to be our very first guest today because I think that the conversations that we had were so crucial. And I think that for anybody listening to be a fly on the wall for these conversations, they can learn a lot. I know I did. So you started off as a child in jiu-jitsu. Tell me a little bit about coming up in jiu-jitsu and some of your experiences that you had and that whole process of becoming a champion. And
Yeah. I would say that I had like a very atypical childhood. My dad was the one that sort of introduced and pushed me into jiu-jitsu. It's not something that I really wanted to explore. I was an immigrant kid. I came to the States, or to New York rather, from Lithuania. And all I really wanted to do as an immigrant was learn English, like proper English, and fit in as much as I could. And so when my dad sort of like pushed me into jujitsu, I immediately was like, oh no, the sport is so weird. Like no one at school knows what it is. People at school make fun of me for being like Karate Kid and stuff like that. So I immediately wanted to distance myself as much as I could from martial arts. And it took me a little while to like really fall in love with jujitsu, but I'm so happy that I stuck with it. And I sympathize a lot with parents that ask me, like, how do I keep my kid interested or invested in jujitsu because, you stuck with it even though you didn't really want to, and look at the payoff. And I really don't know what to say to them because my situation is very unique. I was kind of forced to, it was like a little Stockholm syndrome me. I was forced to learn to enjoy jujitsu until I actually did enjoy it. So I don't have a good answer for that. As far as growing up in jujitsu, I had like so many crazy experiences as a child. I feel very lucky that even though my dad was kind of like an overbearing coach, I feel very fortunate that he was always around because you hear stories about like what happens to kids that are kind of unsupervised or that become really good or are considered like prodigies in their gym spaces, and then the coach kind of takes over their training. And it's not to say that it's always a bad situation, but a lot of the times these children are pushed and they don't have somebody standing up for them, and they don't really necessarily understand what like healthy or normal boundaries look like. So I'm very fortunate. I feel very fortunate that my dad accompanied me to all the tournaments that I went to, and he was always in the training room when I was younger. So he bore witness to me like having some uncomfortable interactions with adults, like having guys get their ego hurt by somebody that's 12, and then like turn the intensity up by a lot, and then sort of have to deal with the after effects of like that kind of aggression. I'm happy that he was there in my corner in that respect, because I think if I was alone, I wouldn't have known how to deal with those situations. I probably wouldn't have felt comfortable going to the adults in the room to sort of vent about it, because at the time it wasn't like jujitsu was a place you went to train. It wasn't a place you went and had heart to hearts with your coach, you know? So
mhm.
I'm very like happy that the experiences that I had in jujitsu were sort of in a more controlled and like sheltered environment when I was a kid.
Do you think it's important for parents to be actively involved in their kids' jujitsu journey?
I am not a parent, but I would say that I think it's important for parents to be involved in any activity their child takes on, especially if that activity is a very like cross social activity. Like there are a lot of people in the room, there are a lot of adults in the room, and then there's this potential of your child spending all of their time with adults. Like I transitioned to being a student of the adult classes when I was 11 years old. So I
Oh,
was not an adult. I didn't have adult emotions. I often found myself crying during those classes and not really understanding how to manage what I was feeling or how to take the energy of the adults that I was surrounded by. So I think if I didn't have a parent around at the time to help me navigate through all those situations or even interfere, on my behalf, like there was a time when I was 12 years old that I got put to sleep by an adult. Not
wow.
their fault, really. I was on top mount and she was doing a cross collar choke on me from bottom, and I didn't respect it because I was like, you can't choke me from bottom mount. That's not real. That's not a real. And then I don't remember anything. All I remember is waking up with a ton of people surrounding me and like looking up at the ceiling at the lights. And somebody told me that when I slumped over and eventually fell when I passed out, that my dad ran over and like pushed the lady to the side and was immediately like, get some water, blah, blah, blah. So if, I had an adult that was present, that was his entire attention was towards me and what I was doing and how I was feeling. And had, there not been an adult like that present, maybe I wouldn't have had that kind of security, as a
Mhm.
child. So I'm very, very fortunate that I had that in my dad. I understand that a lot of people don't necessarily have the means, the time, or the resources to be with their kids all the time, especially in a jujitsu space. But I would highly recommend it as a parent. And that also introduces the idea of like what is an overbearing parent in jiu-jitsu, because there is a balance to be struck with between, being present, being aware, being conscious, being prepared to help your child and support them as needed, or like push them as needed too if they're being a little lazy shit. But there's also, being inappropriate and um being like overextending yourself where a coach should be kind of interfering and not a parent, and sort of making your child's jujitsu your business a bit too much, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, you see all those like those parents, that it's almost a joke, right? The parents when they're coaching, they're just like way more into it than the kids sometimes.
Yes.
And I've had discussions with a lot of people, a lot of parents about this as well, and it's like a combination, I think, of like living vicariously through your kids, and then it is a delicate balance, though, for sure. And especially, so you started, when did you start? You started almost 20 years ago, at least, right?
Exactly 20 years ago when I was 9 years old.
Nice. Yeah, I started 21 years ago, so I was an
Wow.
adult
Oh
though.
my God. So we're right there together.
Yeah, you're the little one. So I mean, those were very completely different times, right? That there was very very rarely, and still now do you see teens class. So a lot of girls end up and a lot of boys end up kind of in that weird awkward, like too big, too large for the kids class, too like young for the adults class. So it's kind of a weird time for sure, especially for young teenage girls. And I talked to a lot of girls through our segments, the next generation, and it's gotten better to where there are more and more teen girls that are sticking with it. But did you have any kids your age to train with, or was it predominantly like once you hit 11 it was like there was no other kids that were even close in age and size?
So the issue with me wasn't that there were no kids for me to train with, because the gym that I was a part of did have a kids program, and it was actually pretty robust considering like it was in a smaller town in New Jersey and we had quite a few competitors. I actually began training in the kids classes with Gianni Gruppo's little brother, Christian, and he used to kick my ass all the time. And now he doesn't train, so I outlasted him. Take that, Christian. But I started having issues with not some of the boys, it was really one boy in the class. We were very competitive with one another, and in our little kids group, we had like I want to say like 5 to 6 kids that were pretty competitive that would go to the Nagas and all the local tournaments and make a show there. So myself and this other boy, he was a little bit older than me, but we were about the same size, we were about the same height and weight. And he started before me, so he would always best me. And I started to narrow the margins a bit, as I started to improve in my jujitsu and I started to gain more like competitive prowess. So there was one day when I actually was able to catch him. I believe it was in a Kimura, or I think, no, it was a triangle. I was able to catch him in a triangle, and I submitted him, and it was the first time in my training experience with him that I had submitted him. I usually would never even get close to getting him in a difficult position. Um, and I was like very proud of that moment. And then as soon as I let go of the triangle, he acted as if like the roll didn't stop, and he
Uh,
just like jumped on me, immediately got into side control, and he Americana'd me very hard. Like he just grabbed my arm and immediately like pulled on it, and it hurt my arm. But my pride was hurt more, not so much that, oh, I just got tapped, but it was like, oh, he didn't respect
mhm.
my submission, and he reacted out of anger and then tried to hurt me. And my dad was there and he saw everything, and he immediately pulled me off the mats and spoke to the coach and was like, this is not okay. Like, this is not an okay situation. And the coach and my dad both agreed that actually, because of the competitive nature of myself and this other boy's like training relationship, that I probably shouldn't be in the kids' classes anymore, because he was like the one person that was pushing me a lot, that was like similar in size to me, but it was a toxic relationship. Like
Mhm.
it was of a toxic nature. So that's why I was encouraged to be a part of the adult classes. And it's hard to navigate that when you're a coach, when you're a parent, when you're a kid yourself. It's hard to navigate that weird in between space when,
Mhm.
like you said, not quite big enough for the adults. And it's awkward for the adults too, I imagine, because I have trained with teenagers myself as an adult, and sometimes I'm very impressed and I'm very supportive, and sometimes I'm like, oh my God, get this kid away from me. All they want to do is hurt me. They have like all this new strength and new
Yep,
hormones, and they just need
yep.
to like get all this energy out. And I'm just, the body that they're taking all their energy out on. So it's a difficult balance to strike, you know. You don't really necessarily know how to best support the kid because you don't know what the intensity level they can take is. So there was a lot of trial and error for me as well. I would train with some people that would give me no resistance, some people who would like completely trash me and make me cry because it was like such a devastating beatdown. Some
No.
people that would like go to mount and then sit in mount and stare at me and be like, okay, so this is what you do in mount. And I'm like, I know how to escape mount. It's like 100 pounds heavier than me and not moving. So this is very difficult for me. Um, so it's a chaotic time. I really don't envy teenagers that are coming up in jujitsu, because there's so much to navigate. You're already navigating so many like developmental cycles, your social life, and now you're navigating this like odd world where you don't really necessarily know where you fit in. I really sympathize.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, like you touched on, right? Puberty is an awkward, weird phase of life. Like that 11 to like probably about 14 or so is just kind of a weird, awkward trying to figure out. I mean, you're always trying to figure out who you are, right? But it's that first kind of kind of changing into adulthood, and it is completely weird. It's funny because you say that, because actually when I was a blue belt, and this is way back in the day, my favorite training partner was this 12-year-old boy, because he was the only one that was even close in size to me compared to everybody else. And it was great because it was fun until he got his man strength. And then once he got his man strength, it was like all over. But it was great in the interim before he had it, because it was like he could kind of match me a little bit and not like just completely destroy me. And then I remember doing like competitions, and I tell the kids this all the time, is like, you got the teenager, you guys are the scariest ones to compete against, in my opinion. I blew out my knee to a teenager. Like, it's just, they don't know their strength, and they're just like, just gonna go for it. They're fearless, I guess. As you get older, you have more fear, right? You're like more cautious and kind of. But so do you then so after you kind of transitioned into the adults classes, actually, let me segue into this. What do you wish that you knew then that you know now?
Wow, what a good question. I think, oh my goodness. So I feel like my parents would say this to me and I wouldn't take it seriously. And they would say, be careful of the people that crop up in your life when you are starting to achieve a modicum of success. Like, be aware of the fact that they are cropping up and like what their kind of purpose is. Like, don't immediately assume that their intentions are pure.
Yeah.
Um, I would extend that to don't assume that the people that are reaching out to you are doing it because they value you as a person, they value your personhood. They think that you are like you are just in general like a good person, someone they want to be surrounded by. And to be careful of the people that you interact with in the jiu-jitsu community that seem to come also out of nowhere, and they seem to be very, very supportive of you, but it kind of comes out of nowhere because I've had several situations where people have appeared as romantic interests or just as friendly interests, and they sort of wanted something from me. And I totally, at the time, again, because I wanted to fit in as a child, I was always sort of like a weird kid at school until I got to high school and really like found like my solid group of friends there. But in the jujitsu sphere, I also didn't know where I belonged because, as you said, being a teenager is so awkward. And I was the youngest person in class at Marcelo's all the time. So I found like dear friendships in a lot of the older women there. And I found not friendships, but sort of like, I guess, guardianships from some of the older men who didn't treat me like, friends, but they were like second dads or like uncles to me
Mm-hmm.
on the mats, and they kind of like looked
Mm-hmm.
out for me. But I really wanted to be a part of like the crew. I wanted to be a part of the people who were hanging out at the gym, who were competitors, who were athletes. They were all older than me. So I was always like sort of craving a sense of belonging there. And when, higher level people or people that had like more prolific names started to pay attention to me or would talk to me or message me, I was super excited by that. It made me feel really accepted. Now, if a girl my age were to come up to me and they were saying, oh, so and so messaged me because they really like my jujitsu, blah blah blah, I would immediately probably be like, block them. Don't. How old are they? Do not talk to them. They don't need to be messaging you about anything but like maybe a congratulations, but they don't need to be DMing you privately at all. If they can comment a congratulations, they can comment a thumbs up, they can do that public facing. There's no need for them to privately DM you,
Yeah.
especially if you're underage. So that would be like my advice to my younger self, to just be cautious and to be self-aware of the fact that I did want as I was craving that sense of belonging, and I would have like fallen down a bad path
Hmm.
had I let a lot of those conversations last for longer than they did, or actually escalated those conversations to things that would have been happening in person. Um, I am very curious to know what you would tell yourself if you were a young Shama starting out in jujitsu.
Oh gosh, there's so many. I think the biggest thing, so for me, the hardest thing that the hard I've had a lot, you've known me, I've had a lot of rough roads in jujitsu. My road in this journey has like been under construction the whole time. Like, and I think the thing that I would look back at and tell myself is, do not wrap your identity up in this. This is just a part of who you are. This is not who you are. And I think I made the mistake as a competitor. I think I made the mistake even as a head of girls and geese. And it's easy to wrap yourself up in something that you love, but it doesn't define who you are. And it's like I said, it's just one part of who you are. Because I think the hardest thing for me, and when I first learned that lesson, is when I got injured and my competitive career ended. And it felt like I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't know who I was without jujitsu. I didn't know who I was without being a competitor. I didn't know who I was without living that lifestyle. And that was probably one of the hardest lessons I had to learn.
That's so true. That's so true. Especially, I so resonate with the identity portion because, um, I also, for me, it was more of like an athlete. Like all I am is an athlete, and I can't expand my definition of myself outside of that because it was all I knew for so long. And then when somebody, or when actually the whole microcosm of jujitsu celebrates this aspect of you, you enjoy the fact that people celebrate
Yeah.
it and you don't want to move away from it. And I'm sure you relate to that with Girls and Geese, where so many people look to you as the bold-faced leader of Girls and Geese. This is who you are. You're before you're Shama, you're Girls and Geese.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
before I was Dom, I was like a world champion or just like an athlete, and people can't kind of distinguish the other modalities of your personality or the other things that you might desire out of your life. And it becomes a difficult puzzle or a difficult ball of yarn to untangle once you do start asking yourself those identity questions when you have to take time away from jujitsu, or if jujitsu just doesn't really make sense in your life the way that it did. So I definitely resonate a lot with that.
Yeah. And I think it's something that a lot of people do, right? And I think you touched on it earlier, right? A lot of people in jiu-jitsu, and I'm not going to generalize because it's changed so much, but a lot of us were kind of the weirdos and the misfits that didn't quite fit in. We're like kind of a little, we don't quite follow we march to the beat of their own drum, right? And then we find this group of other people that are like, hey, you're weirdos too, and you like doing this weird thing. And so you do feel like you finally fit in, but it can make you vulnerable in certain ways. And like you talked about, like there's definitely not everybody in jujitsu is good, and we forget that. We want to say, oh well, they're a good person because they do jujitsu. No, that's a generalization. Like it's a very broad group of people, and no, not all of them are good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would add to that um, being talented and being gifted is also not like necessarily a virtuous quality. Like we assume that being talented makes you better than others. It just makes you better at the thing that you're talented at. It doesn't necessarily make you a good leader or a good instructor or a good teacher or a good mentor, or like you said, a good person. And I would extend the good person analogy to everything in life. Most of us like to think of ourselves as good people. Are we good
Mm-hmm.
people? I don't know what good means in this respect. We do good and bad things.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully the good outweighs the bad that we do, but I think it's important for people that are just kind of getting started in the sport or that are still have their identities very like tightly wound around jujitsu to consider the fact that the people that they're surrounded by are just people. They shouldn't be seen,
100%.
they shouldn't be idolized or placed on any of a greater pedestal than the strangers that we meet in our day to day. Just because we exchange energy with them, just because we kind of train with them, we can respect the fact that they're good training partners, but we don't necessarily need to write their entire personality down as being this thing because of that. You know what I mean?
100%. 100%. And I wanted to kind of circle back. You touched on it a little bit, especially being a young teenager, you are a little bit more vulnerable, right? You're trying to figure out the world. And then when you have these people that you look up to who are maybe not crossing the lines because you don't really understand that there's lines there. Um, when I know you and I talked about this way back in the day, one of our many conversations in like what it was like to have these people messaging you and kind of, hey, you're great. I love your jujitsu. You're especially for you. You got famous in jujitsu, right? Very early on. So that's a lot of pressure. And then being in the spotlight, that's a whole nother level of pressure. But you and I talked about how back in the day, you had these people that you looked up to, and then all of a sudden, once you turned 18, they started to finally go, oh, well, it's okay to cross that line because she's of age now, right?
Yeah, 100%. There were some line crossing before I even turned 18, but I think, nowadays people view age very differently. Some people don't. We don't need to talk about those people. But nowadays, legal situations tell us that, someone underage should not be approached romantically by an adult.
Mhm.
I know different states have different rules, but I think generally most of us assume that like a minor is a minor. They should be, with other minors, and then someone that is an adult can now be with adults. So it was definitely crazy as an adult to look back at some of those interactions
Mhm.
and kind of wrap my head around what was happening. And when I was younger, I saw everything as very innocent. I saw this as a legitimate connection, as a
Mhm.
adult, treating me as an adult and us kind of having the same respect for one another and one another's kind of like emotional maturity. Now I look back at it and I was like, wow, that was gross. These guys are gross. I'm so happy
Mhm.
that, there were a couple of moments where there were like plans made to meet up in person. But
Oh.
I was very intimidated by the idea of like it literally intimidated by the idea of physical intimacy as like a young person, as a young woman, especially with an adult man. And
Mhm.
so I kind of just like backed out or stopped talking to the person or, made an excuse. And I'm so happy that those situations worked out the way they did because now looking back, I can say that those situations probably wouldn't have been good for my mental health, for my emotional health. I wouldn't necessarily say that they would be physically safe for me as well. And I have a lot like my heart kind of goes out to young me because I didn't know what was going on. I was just going off based off of instinct and like I would never support parents prying into their children's private lives and like reading their text messages or anything like that. But I am so like my parents never did that. Thankfully, that would have been so embarrassing, but I'm happy that I was kind of following my gut in terms of not pursuing those situations any further. And it's a shame. It's a shame because there's a lot of like these guys that are still out there today and I would never be like, oh, look at this, look at what they did, what a horrible person.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the jiu-jitsu community is a very kind of difficult place to navigate to when you're kind of having these sorts of open conversations. There's a lot of people that don't think there's anything wrong with stuff like that. But I do hope that, those men had the wherewithal to kind of take a look at what they were doing and walk themselves back from continuing doing stuff like that, and like focusing honestly on their own well-being and their own health, if I can say it like that. So yeah, it was a very, very tricky thing to navigate.
Well, it's gonna be confusing too, right? Because I mean, and you guys, we talked about it a little bit, the idol worshiping, right? Like we hold people on these pedestals that are like, you know, our instructors or our coaches or these, in the spotlight athletes. And to have, I guess, to have them, I mean, it was good too that your parents were so involved as well, because I think that having that support and having, even though, I agree with you. If I was like a 14-year-old girl, 15, even into my, 17, 16, I wouldn't want my mom looking at any of my messages, like that's my life. But I guess definitely having that support and having that kind of guidance, helped to kind of, maybe not at the time for you to realize it, but to kind of, to know, have the wherewithal to like, okay, well, I maybe shouldn't meet up with this person that wants to meet with me, or,
Yeah,
so.
100%. And I would say that like even though my parents didn't like read those messages and they didn't necessarily know what was going on at the time, one thing is for certain that my parents would never have let me go out on my own and like meet up with these people. And my parents were so attached to my jujitsu. Again, they accompanied me to every tournament. They came with me to every training session. So there wouldn't have been like a way, unless it was like a super organized like rendezvous, there would not have been a way for me to meet up with these people unless it was in a public facing way or at the jujitsu gym, which my parents would
Mm-hmm.
have seen and they would have like seen that those interactions happen. So I am grateful that they were so involved because I know that there wouldn't have been like a good covert way to make those connections happen in the first place. And I know that as soon as the people that were having conversations with me would have seen my parents, they would have dipped out. There was one person in particular that was a lot older than me when I was 17. We were having conversations and I was just very like starstruck by them because they were a bigger name at the time and they were like really prolific and they just had a lot of weight behind their name. And I was
Mm-hmm.
very like excited at the prospect of having conversations with this person. And then when I came to Pans, they were actually there as well. And my dad was with me at Pans, and I remember seeing them and they were speaking to a group of people that I was also like close with or I knew them. So I
Mm-hmm.
kind of like stood in this group of people and I started talking to the people that I knew. And I had been having conversations with this individual for maybe like, 3 or 4 months. And this guy pretended like he didn't know me at all. And he like introduced himself to me as if this was like our first time meeting. And my dad happened to like be in the vicinity. Like he wasn't right there, but he was like nearby. And I thought it was really funny at the time. Like I was like, oh, that's like such interesting, funny, strange behavior. Like I wonder why he's acting like he doesn't know me. And
Oh, gosh.
I think a part of me, maybe like the part of me that was insecure was like, oh my God, like maybe he doesn't like me and he doesn't want people to know that we talk. But now as an adult, I'm like, yeah, of course he doesn't want people to know that we talk, it's probably not like a great situation.
Yeah, that is, yeah, that's creepy. That's like, what? How old were you when? I mean, I remember when the first like and this isn't these were this is a grown woman. I remember when the first big sexual assault incident that rocked the jujitsu community happened on the East Coast. How old were you when that happened?
Oh, could you remind me, could you give me a little bit more details about the situation without being too revealing?
It was the very first one that happened down in the DC area.
Oh, yep. Oh my gosh, how old was I? Oh my gosh. I
Because you
don't,
were probably still a kid.
I think that I was, that's difficult. I was actually a part of that team for a little bit as a
Mm-hmm.
child. I didn't train there a lot. I trained there maybe twice, like total. I joined that team because at the time my parents, well, there were people that I was training with them from previous gyms that were my main coaches that decided to join that team, then left after all of this happened because they were not aware, obviously. Um, and I remember I was probably around 11 when I was a part of that team, and then I left when I was like maybe 12 or 13. I remember it was kind of like an internal scandal the way that I left the team. Um, so I think that I was probably in my late teens when it was all happening. And I remember sort of gleaning all the information of how people left the team and how it was sort of like a very rushed and hectic thing that people didn't want to be associated with the team anymore and that all this stuff was coming out. And to be honest, like the case that started all of that, which involved two men and like a woman, like
Mm-hmm. And the
spending
parking garage.
like yeah,
Yeah.
social time at a bar. That case made my blood boil when I was younger, and it just made honestly I was at a time in my life where I was starting to kind of discover violence against women, especially like sexual assault and like sex crimes against women. And I was starting to comprehend that the world maybe was more unsafe for women than I previously believed. So, kind of learning that this had happened at that time when I was so deeply involved in like doing all this kind of like research and kind of wrapping my head around this being a reality for a lot of people, the fact that it had occurred in the space of jujitsu, the fact that this incident had occurred and it involved in a deep way like my former gym, the fact that there were people at that gym that were women that I trained with all the time and that I had like interactions with and built relationships with, was really hard to process. Like I think all I wanted was as much distance away from that gym as possible, and like I think I neglected telling people that I was a part of that gym for a long time because I felt maybe a little bit even embarrassed to be associated with that. But I do remember it was like my first sort of like shock of like how people reacted when all the Jeffrey Epstein stuff was coming out. That was how I reacted to that situation because I was like, wow, this sacred kind of space that I assumed
Mm-hmm.
was like, as we talked about, more virtuous than other spaces
Mm-hmm.
because of the nature, like of because of the way that we interact with one another, because of the
Yeah.
closeness, the proximity, all of it, the intimacy. I was like, there's no way that, not that there's no way these things can happen, but not at a team that I was a part of, not involving people that I interacted with. No way. And learning that it was a huge shock. And it definitely
Yeah. I
made me
remember it.
go ahead,
It
go ahead.
rocked the community.
Yeah, it was extremely devastating. And then it also brought up this larger question of, is it happening more often than we think? And is it happening right now in other places that are
Mm-hmm.
maybe protected as well? You know, it takes a lot for a situation like this to actually affect a gym and to actually affect the reputations of the people that are involved, because the first thing people want to do is question the efficacy and the reliability of the people that are bringing those claims forward, and to say, well, let's put pause on everything, let's figure out if this is actually the truth, which is like the right way to go about things for sure. But also it just then it brings into question like how many different situations like this are being delayed from being brought to the limelight, from being brought
100%.
into the public purview, so that we can then understand that these gyms are not safe for women or basically kind of anybody. And it's preventing us from kind of like policing the community a bit, but also maintaining safety in such a vulnerable sport as well.
100%. Because I mean, I thought when that first happened, that was the first time. I think it was a long time ago. And I mean, I put myself in similar situations. My team, we were all in our 20s. We would go party on 6th Street in Austin and have fun. And I definitely put myself in situations where that could have been me had it been the route that type of person, right? And I just remember that whole incident was kind of like the first eye-opening, like, wow, we are like this can happen here too. And I guess because you were so young, and I know as you grew into adulthood, you became a huge advocate and a huge kind of source of I guess safety for a lot of the women to come to you to talk about these things. Because when I was in New York, you and I used to talk about like this was happening and that was happening, and these women were coming to you. Do you think that by being so young when it first started happening, that kind of I guess kind of helped you be kind of this beacon for a lot of women as you grew into being an adult? And did that kind of shape how you navigated and looked at, I guess, like your interactions as an adult with some of your teammates and with the just dating in the community as well, you know?
That's such a good question. I think that when you're an adult, um, unfortunately, you sort of like lose a lot of the courage you showed when you were younger, because when you were younger, you felt maybe more invincible and less restrained by the general rules of society. So when I was young and 16 and 17 and sort of like learning about inequality and learning about different cultures, and how genital mutilation was still such a huge concern in a lot of countries, how women were being arrested for being like victims of rape, how women were being killed for being victims of rape. All of that was sort of like directly at the forefront for me. I couldn't fathom that in a modern universe, women were still treated as worse than second class citizens in a lot of different cultures and countries, and that there were so many cases of um things being very difficult for women even in like Western countries, that it just had my blood boiling. My hormones were going crazy. I was like, fuck all of you people, fuck all of this. And I was very loud and open about it. I got into
Mm-hmm.
arguments with people about it all the time, online, in person, whatever. It didn't matter. I felt like a fire had been lit under my ass, and I didn't care who heard me. And a part of it, like, I remember when I started to campaign for equal pay for women in jiu-jitsu, that actually was inspired in a part by my dad. Like, thanks, Dad, for that, because he was tired of hearing me complain. He was like, okay, enough. Like, I get it, you're tired of it. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to sit here and complain?
Mm-hmm.
And he was just trying to shut me
Mm-hmm.
up. But I was like, you know what? You're right. I do have to do something about this. So I decided to like create this whole effort behind mostly about bringing awareness like behind the IBJJF not offering equal prize money
Yep.
for men and women at the BJJ Pros. And you know that ignited this huge firestorm of a conversation where people actually did start to debate whether you know women deserve to have equal prize money and you know a lot of other it was like across different sports. People from different sports got involved, and like the U.S. women's soccer team got mentioned a lot. But I felt like so empowered by the women that were standing behind me to keep talking, and then I felt disempowered by mostly men that were coming for me in my direct messages and in comments of posts saying that, you know, I didn't know what I was talking about and I was really young and I had to learn
Oh,
the ways of the universe and or
oh,
the ways of the
wow.
world rather, like this is how modern society works, like this has nothing to do with your feelings. So that kind of that shelled me up a little bit. Definitely interacting with grown men that, you know, had negative things to say about my character and like where I was coming from. It made me a little bit less brave to come out there and like speak my mind. So I think that that definitely trickled down to my adulthood self, like being a bit more careful and being a bit more pragmatic about the things that I choose to say, the people that I choose to name or spotlight, and
Mhm.
kind of like you know, gathering all the data before I necessarily make like a big statement about something. But
Yeah.
I appreciate, you know, I appreciate the boldness of my younger self, and I appreciate that like now I think I'm more in like a middle ground. Like I'm not, I'm definitely still ready to pop off on anybody that says anything about anything, but I'm also ready to kind of take a step back and kind of reassess a situation, if that makes sense.
You were actually the first one of the very first like athletes, and this is when you were really in the spotlight that was really advocating for equal pay. And I remember back in that time they'd be like, there were always these arguments, right, on why, oh, there's not enough women to fill these divisions. Oh, nobody watches women's jujitsu. I mean, we were kind of clumped in with the kids for a lot of these tournaments. Like, where it's like, you just go over there and do your thing. All right, you did your division, bye. And that's I think when you first started coming on my radar is when you started really kind of pushing for that. And that's interesting because you were a teenager at the time too, which is pretty awesome. And you were the one that was leading the way back in the day, like what, 15 years ago now almost.
Dude, it
And
really was amazing. I also like want to highlight that even though the BJJ Pro like adjusted kind of how they kept the prize money, the disparity still existed, but they like added an addendum that was like the division has to have this many people in order for prize money to be
mm-hmm,
awarded because I remember one of my arguments was like people were like, "Oh, the women's divisions, there's no people." And I'm like, one of
mm-hmm.
the men's divisions at black belt had two people in it. And they earned more money. The second prize winner, who just had to lose to get money, won more money than the absolute division winner in the women's division. Like, what? Are you kidding me? So, I that was one of the arguments that people had. And then I want to highlight that because of those efforts, the IBJJF released the fact that they would be giving equal prize money to the top black belt women and men athletes. So that was pretty cool. And I also like I remember my sister in this campaign effort, Ana Vieira. She was all about it. She was posting about this everywhere and like
Mm-hmm.
arguing with people on my behalf. I fully remember her putting in the effort to just really back this cause when I was a teenager. And so, like, she will forever be like my sister in my heart as someone that like believes in like the message and everything like that. And I am so grateful that even to this day, the message is still loud and clear. Like Fionn Davies is such
Mm-hmm.
a huge proponent of equal pay. And as you can see, like she is about to fight on a basically a female headlined card, which is so exciting to see. And she's such an incredible competitor. She's one of the most exciting competitors of like the modern generation of jiu-jitsu athletes. So there's like almost no question about women's jiu-jitsu prospering, women's jiu-jitsu increasing in numbers, increasing in like flash and style. And honestly, female athletes now being able to like earn like a moderately decent living on average. So I'm just like so proud of the fact that the efforts haven't slowed.
No.
They've just been like multiplied. So I'm really grateful for all the girls out there that are like fighting the good fight.
I mean, like how far we've come, right? Like from back in the day to where we are now. Can you imagine where it's going to be in another 15 years? Like it's going to be insane.
Yeah, I'm like, it's so, so, so exciting. And it feels like I'm sure for you it feels bittersweet to sort of be in a place where you're seen more of as like a pioneer, rather than like a front-facing individual in the jiu-jitsu scene. Because it does feel a little bit bittersweet for me. I'm like, okay, yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
had a blip in time where, you know, things were really, really crazy and big and like effervescent. And then I decided to step away as an athlete and things slowed down a lot. But I still can like appreciate so much how jujitsu has become like a valid career for a lot of
Yeah.
women. And it still is like a career for me too, even though I'm not like a competitive athlete, I'm still able to make money through jujitsu. And like I literally just had someone reach out to me and they're like, listen, if you ever want to open a gym, I'm ready to be an investor. So it's incredible that that still exists, but there is still this kind of like bittersweetness of like maybe seeing like that your train pass by and then
Yeah.
seeing everyone else sort of like come up with a little bit less obstacles, a little bit less standing in their way. And I'm so grateful that they don't need to face those obstacles. But I also think back of like, oh, like I wonder where like our careers would have been had we not had to
Yeah.
face some of those obstacles too.
It, for me, it's kind of like this. I tell the girls, I'm like, you guys have more opportunities than I ever dreamed were possible. And it's amazing. And I was actually talking to Penny Thomas, who I got my black belt from, and I was like telling her, I was like, it's crazy because it was hard and we faced a lot of like adversary and we got a lot of crap. And back in the day, to be a woman in jiu-jitsu, you had to kind of roll with the boys. Like you had to put up with, especially for me, I came out of kind of it was a traditional jiu-jitsu academy, but it was also the only jiu-jitsu academy in Austin, if you can believe that. And it was also an MMA academy. So everybody that did MMA in the state of Texas would come through there. And you had to be able to kind of deal with the locker room talk. You had to be kind of able to deal with the boys being boys, and hold your own. And there was a type of jujitsu woman, but now you can be any woman and be in jujitsu. And but I was telling Penny, I was like, you know what? It was hard and it sucked and we dealt with so much crap, but I wouldn't have it any other way. I don't know if I would be as motivated and into it if I came into it now because I don't know. I think the hard road is my road. I've gotten used to it in life and it's made me who I am, and I like who I am. It's all the challenges that kind of shape you into who you become, right? So it is bittersweet. And I wish I did have the opportunities when I was competing all the time. Like, gosh, I mean, when I was competing, I started same time as you. And when I was competing as a woman, it was like, well, one other woman showed up, so there's your division, regardless of her belt, her size, her age, anything. And a lot of the times I got stuck competing against the teenage girls. And I went to the first IBJJF when it first came to America. And I remember the excitement of it. It was so awesome. And I was right behind that group where it was like what everybody was in one division, and then purple belt broke off, and then brown belt broke, and I was always one generation behind that. So I got to reap those benefits of the heavy lifting that those women did. But it is kind of bittersweet. But you know what? Like I said, I wouldn't be who I am today if not for the struggles that put me here, you know?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you there. I feel like I think also it's pretty spectacular that we went through these difficulties and went through these challenges and now are able to have conversations like this looking back and hopefully offer these conversations as advice points for the new generations that are coming up as like, hey, this is what, was happening with us back in the day. And it still happens to this day, people still
Mm-hmm.
women are still placed in uncomfortable situations with their coaches or with their teammates or with their teams. And they are ostracized or outed or don't have their claims taken seriously. And unfortunately, a lot of women feel like they have to leave or they have to stop doing jujitsu. And it just like is another barrier of entry to the sport. So hopefully having these conversations opens people up to being able to speak out about the difficulties that they're dealing with and maybe also like I don't know, like maybe keep their guard up as well because even though jujitsu is fantastic and it's like it's granted me like everything I've ever dreamed of in my life and like actually more than I ever could have imagined, it is still a part of the real world. Like there are still seedy characters in it. There are still people that don't actually care about you, that they don't necessarily intend to hurt you for the sake of hurting you, but they just don't care that their needs being met is going to happen at the cost of like you feeling safe or you feeling healthy. So I think it's good that there are people that are able to kind of look back and speak out about the things that happened before to sort of, prevent these things from continuing or just like practice bringing more awareness to the subjects.
100%. And I want to circle back. So I know I talk to a lot of little girls, and I think a lot of them, I want to be an instructor. I want to own my own academy. But one thing I love about you is, you took while you were this big champion in jujitsu, you were also a student at Columbia getting your degree in art. And I love how you've transitioned from, this competitor into you combining your art, your two forms of art, your jujitsu as well as your actual art. And I think, how has that transition been, and what does that look like?
It was thank you so much for bringing it up because it's been such a crazy like journey and when I was younger I never let myself believe that I could be an artist and never let myself believe that I could make money doing art or that anyone would want to support my art. And this is like, I'm an immigrant. I come from immigrants. My pathway was to be a doctor or to be a lawyer or to be in finance, make a lot of money, keep the family safe and secure. But when I came to America, I also had this, when you're in America, when you go from like a smaller country to America, you're surrounded by the idea of the idealized fantasy that anything is possible, like
Mm-hmm.
the greatest like artists in the world come from America, like in terms of like people with like the most prolific music careers, um, actors, musicians, like all kinds of creators. A lot of them are supported in America because, this environment is very conducive to supporting artists in ways. So I felt like I was finally able to kind of consider art as like a career. And I didn't start to take it seriously until I was maybe like in my mid to late, no, I would say mid 20s because I still had this, feeling in me like, oh, you're still just kind of an athlete. You're still just kind of like a brain. You should just work in corporate and like figure out how to like make money through jujitsu. And I had this like feeling that if I could work as hard as I did to become a world champion in jujitsu, that I could use those learnings and use that like form of discipline in the art world to help build and foster an art career. And it took me a long time to be able to merge jiu-jitsu and art because I don't want to make art about jiu-jitsu. Like I hate art
Mhm.
about rolling or like here's a painting of a guy in a gi or here's a
Yeah.
painting of this, big jujitsu celebrity. Like that's fine for what it is. Like it's fine to kind of bring awareness of what jujitsu is in the form of art. But what I always wanted to create art about was kind of my willingness to like dive into a personal dream world and like exist within that dream world and then see how it aligns with the reality of like living or the reality of being a human in the world. And I never thought the two could meet. I was always like separate jujitsu from art. They don't exist together. Art is my escape. It's a place where I can talk about these really crazy things like spirituality and consciousness and awareness and how, trees have magic in them, things that people are like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, it's not an armbar, get it away from me. But I think like just opening myself up to talking about these things and kind of sharing my art with the community gave me more confidence to see how I could like, morph the two a little bit. And I actually applied for a residency a few years ago that I was like a finalist in. I didn't end up getting the residency, but I did get amazing feedback from the panel of judges. They really liked my art and they thought it was like a standout, but they said that for how important jujitsu was to me in, the written portions of the application, they really didn't see it coming through in my art. So I had to kind of sit back and think like, wow, it is such a huge part of my life and I don't talk about it in my art. Like I don't incorporate it in my art. So that kind of kickstarted me thinking about how the concepts that I experienced in jujitsu, the vulnerability, the physical intimacy and closeness, like the proximity between yourself and your training partner, the experiences I've had with like all the various people, academies, how I can blend that into art. And that's actually coincidentally the same time I started to think about painting in a larger scale, and I started to do murals. And my first mural client was a guy that I knew through jujitsu. He owned his own kind of supplement warehouse, and he was laying down mats in that warehouse, and it was going to be a jujitsu space. And he wanted a mural that was going to be the background of the mat space for
Mhm.
pictures and stuff like that. And that was the first mural I did, and that sort of kickstarted me becoming a muralist and me actually like
Oh, nice.
making, yeah, like making a career out of art because murals have been like the most consistent and like most like financially solvent way for me to be an artist. And I kind of resisted, again, even coming into murals, resisted the idea of using jujitsu to get these commissions and to make these connections and network. And then all of like majority of my mural clients have been in some way or another involved in jujitsu. If it's not a jujitsu gym, it's somebody that heard of me through a jujitsu person or somebody that like went to a gym that a mural was painted in and was like, I like that mural. I would want something like that for my business or for my personal use. And so I was like, wow, okay, no, the community has your back. Like, use the community, let the community
Yep.
help you, let the community support you and uplift you. And that was a huge learning for me because I don't know about you, like sometimes when you build distrust with a community because of like certain things happening or like because
Mhm.
I was so supported as a competitive athlete and then people the turnaround rate for people caring about you is really quick when you're an
Yeah.
athlete because they're like who's the next person on
Yeah.
top.
Yeah.
So I kind of had this distrust around the community, and now I'm like, no, 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 no. The community has your back. The community always has your back. Utilize the community and let the community kind of like support you in that way. So that was a big learning for me.
That's awesome. That yeah, and I complete on that last point, I completely relate to you, right? I think especially if you have a bad experience, you kind of close yourself off and you forget like you're a part of this something bigger than yourself, and that there is this really awesome community out there. And despite what may have happened to you in these certain situations, like there's still a lot of people in it, and there's a lot of people who want to support you and see you succeed. And and going back to the art, I come from a family of artists. Both my grandmothers were artists. My one was a sculptor and one was a painter, and so I love to see how you've kind of married your two arts together. And I I love that you found a way to kind of express yourself and express all the parts of you through your career now. It's really awesome, because I know, like I said earlier, like a lot of these girls, they want to be owners, they want to be instructors, they want to be champion athletes, but to see that you other interests that you have can lead you on a path that kind of goes together is really awesome, because I think you're the only artist that I know that's forged a path in jujitsu with other mediums, which is really cool. So congratulations. You're paving the way for the next group of women that, they're like coming up and are artists and love jujitsu. So it's really awesome.
Thank you. I feel like you see it happen a lot with like actors will use the platform they build off of like the movies or the TV shows that they're a part of to then kickstart doing something they're like actually very invested in, like pursuing like a very specific degree, or like becoming like a chef, or starting their own like clothing line, or writing a book. And like I really think that people um should be inspired to use the community that they're a part of all the time to like invest themselves in the thing that they're deeply deeply passionate about, because I've always been someone who's passionate about many things. Like I'm very interested in a lot of different things, a lot of different modes of art, like not just fine art or physical art, but like music and film and things like that. And I always felt like it was such a disservice to myself and for other people who do this to just focus on one single thing and then remove themselves from all these other interests that they have in all these different places that they want to explore, just because they feel like no one will care or they don't see a pathway for it. And jujitsu has like given me so much in my life. It's given me friends, community, but it's literally like I got detained in Denmark when I was 21 because I lost my green card in Portugal when I went to Euros. Who was there for me when I was in Denmark? A jujitsu person, like a jujitsu person. Shanti Avelia let me stay at her house and like took me around Denmark and like helped me figure out my whole like boarding foil situation to come back to the States. That was a jujitsu gift. Like jujitsu has given me many, many gifts, and I feel like people, if they're struggling to kind of find their identity outside of jiu-jitsu, if they've been marking themselves as like jiu-jitsu people first, they need to understand that there are so many of us that have felt the same way, and that you can explore whoever you are outside of jiu-jitsu, even within jiu-jitsu.
100%. 100%. That nailed it. Boom.
Boom!
Mic drop. No, like I mean, that's I think like I talked about earlier when you asked me that question. It is like we are multifaceted individuals. One thing does not define who we are. We can be all these things. You can love all these things, and you can still be a badass in jujitsu, and you can still love it and train every day, but just don't forget who you are outside of it too, because that's just as important. And your other interests are just as important, and your other hobbies and things you do in your time is just as important. So, and I think like I talked about a little bit earlier, like when you first start training jujitsu, you fall in love, right? It's just like, oh, that's all I want to do is just do this. And then you forget about everything else, all the other parts of you and what make you up. So I love that you've found balance. I love that you've been able to unite your two gifts, your two of your many gifts, I'm sure, and to make forge a career and lead a path. Like again, once again, you are leading that path for the rest of us.
I do want to like touch on one thing that I think you will probably have a lot to say about in regards to like organizing girls and geese and kind of like being paving the way in a lot of ways. That stuff like this does not happen overnight. Like I think that
No.
a big delusion that I had when I was growing up and I was seeing, people in careers that like I wanted, people in creative careers, I would just assume like, okay, there are situations where because of nepotism or because of like who you know, who your parents are, that people do find overnight success, but most of the time it is just throwing darts at balloons over and over and over and over and over again. And like maybe in 20 years, one balloon will pop and that will be like an opportunity for you. And I was like under this delusion that things just kind of like happen for people, which I shouldn't have been because, being a jiu-jitsu athlete was one of the hardest aspects of my life. Like the amount of work, the amount of intensity, the amount of like
Mm-hmm.
walking myself back from like a very, very steep cliff that I had to do is insane. And it's the same with art. Like I've had jujitsu people actually reach out to me about art, which I'm so grateful for. Like, thank you for please use me as a resource if you're listening to this and you are interested in that as well. They're like, oh well, I don't really know how to start. And I'm like, well, there is no playbook. It's not like jujitsu. You can't sign up for a competition. You can't sign up for an art competition and be like, hey, my art is the best out of everyone else. Like those things exist, but it's all so subjective and it's not a linear path at all. And I was like, you really need to just start by doing what you're doing, making work and putting yourself out there and like searching for opportunities wherever they come and like to not get discouraged because there's so many people out there that are incredible names and they have made franchises for themselves like in music or food or even athletics that had to work for 20 straight years with nothing to show for it, with like no real success, like no monetary success, no like big houses or like their names printed on billboards. You just have to do the work and you have to keep going. Even if you don't feel like it, and you feel like things aren't working out, you have to keep working because that's exactly like that's how I became a world champion. That's like why Girls and Geese is like so successful and like touts the numbers it does is because you don't stop. So that's like one thing that I'd
No.
like to leave people with, and I'm sure you have something to say about it as well.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, that is like it's like an iceberg, right? Everybody just sees the success. They don't see everything else underneath it, right? And I actually have women that reach out because there's so many more organizations and groups out there now that are dedicated for women. And they go, oh, how do you deal with this? How do you deal with that? And I say, there is no playbook. I was just first. That's it. I was just the first one that dared to do what nobody else wanted to do and stuck with it through hard times, And yes, there are days where I want to quit. It's just like jujitsu, right? Like you see the success and then you have to do the grind. You got to embrace the suck, right? You just got to get through it and believe in what you are capable of and dream big. Maybe it won't turn out exactly how you think it's going to, but just keep going. There is no rule book. There's no path to anything. It just kind of happens and consistency. Like you get good at jujitsu by doing jujitsu. You get good at whatever you're doing by doing it over and over and just like dealing with the punches, as they come. So I'm right there with you. There is no secret to success in anything. it's, it's hard work, dedication, and believing in yourself.
Yeah, and it really is. And like, showing up even at times when you don't feel like showing up, or doing it even if you feel like it's not going to lead anywhere, and also like letting expectations fall to the wayside, because as you said, like things don't always work out as you dreamed. Like when I was younger, I dreamed of being like a huge jiu-jitsu superstar. Like I dreamed of kind of being like a Hodger Gracie, like everywhere you go, people are like, "Oh my God, you're like the best in the world." But I'm like I feel so grateful that my career has exposed me to all the right people. Like I no longer care about like the quantity. Like I don't care about how many people I'm put in front of, how many people like resonate with me or support me or whatever. It's more about quality. Like I'm very fortunate to have had incredible people like yourself like placed in my path to help guide me along and to help me find these opportunities. So just trusting the fact that you are in the right place, and that if you do consistently keep showing up for yourself, the results will follow. They might look different from what you expected or anticipated, but they might even like be better for you in the end.
100%. I thought I'd be a famous photographer. That was my dream. Like, I
It's
was like,
not too late. Oh my
yeah.
God. Jiu-Jitsu photographers, DM Shama right now. Take her on a shoot.
No, I wanted to be a National Geographic photographer. That's what I wanted. I was 16 years old, and photography was my very first passion. It was back in the day of the dark room, and I loved the chemistry and the creation and making something out of nothing. And digital kind of killed that for me. It was like instant gratification all of a sudden, right? But anyways, but yeah, life does not turn out how we expect it to most of the time, but there's so many blessings in the way, and aligning yourself and with people like you and people like-minded individuals is just it's priceless. So I'm so happy that I'm so grateful for your friendship. I'm so grateful for this time that you spent talking with me today, and I hope everybody enjoyed being a fly on the wall, because this is just me and Dom catching up, really.
I'm so grateful too. Thank you so much for including me. Our conversations, I always walk away feeling really great about our conversations, and feeling like inspired to like reuptake whatever it is that I'm like currently like messing around with in my own head.
No, me too. Me too. I ever since I think I met you, you were maybe about barely 18 years old or so. And I just remember my first impression of you was like, this is an old soul. Like this is somebody, like, this is somebody who's been around the block a few times, and she's only 18. And I'm like, how am I having this full on like adult? I mean, you're adult, but like you were just so mature, and your advice, and like I said, you were wise beyond your years then, and you still are. So
Thank you so
but
much. It's probably partially attributed to all the trauma.
it makes us who we are, you know.
Exactly, exactly. Every challenge just feeds us into becoming exactly who we are meant to be.
100%. No, I'm so grateful for all my hard knocks. As hard as they've been, they've like they've made me who I am, you know. So but anyways, well, thank you so much for taking time out. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I really hope that you enjoyed this as much as I did. Reach out to Dom if you guys ever have any questions about how to combine your art with the art of jujitsu. There are more options out there now than ever for you to have a career in jujitsu. It is not a linear path. It is, there's so many different options out there, and you can create anything you want. So, again, thank you everyone for tuning in. Thanks, Dom, for chatting with me. I always appreciate catching up with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And if you guys, like Shama said, if you guys ever want to reach out to me for anything at all, art stuff, jiu-jitsu stuff, life stuff, whatever, old soul stuff, whatever you want to chat about, the best way to always contact me is through Instagram. My username is Dom da Bomb Your Mom, or you could just look up my name, which is equally difficult to spell.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. You take care. Tune in for our next edition of Life Champions in Life, where we feature outstanding individuals that are not only outstanding on the mats, but outstanding in life as well. So you have a great rest of your day, and thank you again for taking time to listen.
Bye.
Bye.